The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Prince Harry approached the imposing iron gates. His footsteps echoed against the ancient cobblestones, each step carrying the weight of years of separation from his family. The California sun had tanned his skin, and his casual attire stood in stark contrast to the formal atmosphere that surrounded the royal residence. He had flown across the Atlantic with one purpose burning in his heart: to see his father, King Charles, who had been diagnosed with cancer just weeks earlier. Harry's mind raced back to the phone call that had changed everything. Meghan had been in the kitchen preparing breakfast for their children when his phone buzzed with an unknown UK number. The voice on the other end belonged to his private secretary, delivering news that made his blood run cold. His father, the newly crowned king, was facing a battle that no crown or title could help him win. The diagnosis had been kept strictly confidential, shared only with the immediate family and a handful of trusted advisors. The prince had spent sleepless nights pacing their Montecito mansion, wrestling with the decision to return to England. The wounds from his departure were still fresh, the interviews and revelations still echoing in the media. His relationship with William remained fractured, and his conversations with his father had become increasingly rare and formal. Yet, despite all the pain and public scrutiny, the news of his father's illness had awakened something primal within him: the need to be there for family when it mattered most. Meghan had supported his decision, though her eyes revealed her own concerns about his return to the place that had caused them both so much anguish. She understood that this was bigger than their grievances with the institution. This was about a son's love for his father, stripped of all royal protocol and public expectations. They had discussed whether she should accompany him, but ultimately decided that his first visit back should be a solo journey, allowing him to navigate the complex family dynamics without additional pressure. The flight had been turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. Harry found himself staring out the window at the clouds below, remembering countless trips he had made on this same route during happier times. He recalled family holidays, state visits, and official engagements that had once defined his life. The contrast between his current situation and those memories felt overwhelming. He was no longer the spare heir, no longer the charming prince who could do no wrong in the public eye. He had become something else entirely: a family member seeking reconciliation in the face of mortality. As his car had pulled up to the castle gates, Harry's heart had begun to pound. The familiar sight of the round tower rising majestically against the gray English sky brought back a flood of childhood memories. He remembered racing through these same grounds with William, their laughter echoing off the ancient walls. He thought of Christmas mornings when the castle buzzed with family energy, of quiet moments with his grandmother in her private apartments, of the sense of belonging that had once made this place feel like home. Now, standing before the gates, Harry felt like a stranger returning to a foreign land. The massive structure loomed before him, its windows like eyes watching his approach. He had called ahead through proper channels, or so he thought, informing the palace of his intention to visit. His private secretary had assured him that the message had been received and that arrangements would be made. The urgency of his father's condition had made protocol seem less important than family bonds. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of the English countryside that he had missed more than he cared to admit. Harry adjusted his jacket and approached the security checkpoint, where two guards stood at attention. Their red tunics and distinctive bearskin hats were as familiar to him as his own reflection, yet today they seemed to represent a barrier rather than protection. These were the same guards who had once saluted him with respect and familiarity, who had known him since he was a child, running through the castle corridors. As he drew closer, Harry noticed that the guards remained perfectly still, their faces hidden beneath their ceremonial headwear. The formality of their stance struck him as unusually rigid, even for the typically disciplined household division. Usually, there would be some small acknowledgement of his presence, a subtle nod or the slightest shift in posture that indicated recognition. Today, there was nothing but stone-cold military precision. The prince cleared his throat softly and stepped forward, expecting the usual exchange of pleasantries that had always preceded his entries to the castle. He had prepared himself for potential awkwardness, knowing that his changed status within the family might create some uncertainty among the staff. However, he had not prepared for what was about to unfold. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic beyond the castle walls and the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. Harry's confidence began to waver as he stood there, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. The weight of his decision to leave royal life behind suddenly felt heavier than ever. He realized that in seeking independence and freedom, he might have inadvertently severed ties that ran deeper than he had understood. The institution that had once protected and supported him now seemed to view him as an outsider, despite the blood that connected him to its very foundation. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. Here he stood, a prince by birth, a son seeking to comfort his ailing father, yet facing the possibility of being denied entry to the place where he had been raised. The guards before him represented more than just security. They were the physical manifestation of an institution that operated by rules and protocols that transcended personal relationships and family bonds. As the minutes ticked by, Harry's initial nervousness gave way to a growing sense of determination. He had not traveled thousands of miles to be turned away at the gates. His father was inside these walls, potentially facing the fight of his life, and Harry was determined to bridge whatever gap had formed between them. The public feuds, the media storms, the broken relationships. None of it seemed to matter in the face of his father's mortality. The morning sun began to break through the clouds, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Harry took a deep breath, drawing on the courage that had carried him through military service in Afghanistan and countless public appearances. He stepped forward with renewed purpose, ready to speak directly to the guards and state his intention clearly. Little did he know that his words would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his place in the royal family, and force him to confront the true cost of the choices he had made. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the bonds of family against the rigid structure of an ancient institution, with a son's love for his father hanging in the balance. Harry stepped forward with measured confidence, his voice carrying the authority that years of royal training had instilled in him. "Good morning," he said, addressing the senior guard whose chevrons indicated his rank. "I'm here to see my father. I believe arrangements were made for my visit." The words felt strange on his tongue, formal and distant when discussing his own family home. The guard's response came swift and unwavering, delivered with military precision that cut through the morning air like a blade. "The prince is not accepting visitors." The words hung between them, each syllable loaded with implications that Harry struggled to process. The guard's voice was respectful but firm, leaving no room for negotiation or discussion. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, never meeting Harry's gaze, as if the prince, standing before him, was merely another member of the public, seeking unauthorized entry. Harry felt the ground shift beneath his feet, though he remained physically steady. The formal address stung more than he had expected. The prince, not His Majesty the King, not your father, not even King Charles, just the prince, a title that seemed to reduce his father to a distant figurehead, rather than the man who had taught him to ride horses in these very grounds. The clinical nature of the guard's response revealed the careful deliberation behind it, suggesting that specific instructions had been given about how to handle his arrival. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding," Harry continued, his voice maintaining its composure despite the growing knot in his stomach. "I'm Prince Harry. This is my family home and my father is unwell." Surely there's been some confusion with the scheduling. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing his phone as if to show proof of communication with the palace staff, though the gesture felt increasingly futile. The guard remained unmoved, his training evident in every aspect of his bearing. Years of service had taught him to follow orders without question, regardless of personal feelings or external pressures. "I have my orders, Your Royal Highness," he replied, the title now sounding hollow and ceremonial rather than respectful. "The prince is not accepting visitors today. You'll need to contact the private secretary's office to arrange any future appointments." The word appointments hit Harry like a physical blow. Appointments to see his own father in his own childhood home during a family crisis. The bureaucracy of royal life, which he had tried so hard to escape, now stood as a wall between him and the man who had raised him. He thought of his children back in California, who might never truly understand their grandfather because of the complex web of protocol and procedure that governed their family's every interaction. Harry's mind raced through possible explanations for this cold reception. Perhaps his father was genuinely too unwell to receive visitors, and the medical team had advised against any unnecessary stress. Perhaps the king was undergoing treatment that required complete isolation. Or perhaps, and this thought made his chest tighten, this was a deliberate message, a formal way of expressing the family's ongoing displeasure with his choices and public statements. The prince found himself studying the guard's face, searching for any hint of recognition or personal sympathy. These men had protected his family for years, had witnessed his growth from a mischievous child to a young man, had stood watch during both his triumphs and his struggles. Yet now they showed him nothing but professional detachment, as if decades of shared history had been erased by his decision to step back from royal duties. "Can you at least confirm that my message was received?" Harry asked, his voice betraying the first hints of frustration. "My private secretary was told that the visit had been approved. Someone must have the authority to clarify this situation." He was grasping for any thread of hope, any indication that this was merely an administrative error that could be quickly resolved. The senior guard exchanged a barely perceptible glance with his colleague before responding. "All communication regarding royal schedules goes through the proper channels, Your Royal Highness. I suggest you contact the Master of the Household's office during regular business hours." The response was polite but final, delivered with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with similar situations countless times before. Harry realized that he was being handled, processed through the same system used for managing unwanted visitors and persistent members of the media. The irony was bitter and profound. He had spent years complaining about the suffocating nature of royal protocol, only to find himself on the wrong side of those same barriers when he needed them to bend. The institution that had once shielded him from the world now shielded itself from him. As he stood there in the lengthening silence, Harry became acutely aware of the growing attention his presence was attracting. Palace staff moved past on their morning duties, their eyes carefully averted, but their awareness of the situation obvious in their deliberate avoidance of the scene unfolding at the gates. He knew that within hours, if not minutes, news of his presence and rejection would spread through the tight-knit community that served the royal household. The thought of media attention made his stomach churn. He could already envision the headlines, the speculation about family feuds and royal divisions. His attempt at a private reconciliation with his ailing father would become public fodder, dissected and analyzed by commentators who knew nothing about the personal pain driving his journey. The very publicity he had sought to escape by leaving royal life would inevitably find him again, drawn by the drama of family conflict. Harry's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he resisted the urge to check it immediately. Part of him hoped it might be a message from his father's office, clarifying the confusion and welcoming him inside. Another part feared it might be Meghan, checking on his progress and expecting news of a reunion that now seemed impossible. How could he explain to his wife and children that he had been turned away from his own family home like a stranger? The morning air grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, but Harry felt increasingly cold. The casual clothes he had chosen for the journey, jeans and a simple jacket, now seemed to emphasize his outsider status. He remembered the days when he would arrive at the castle in military uniform or formal attire, when his presence was expected and welcomed, when the guards would have moved heaven and earth to accommodate his needs. Standing there, rejected and uncertain, Harry began to understand the true price of his independence. Freedom from royal obligations had come with an unexpected cost, the loss of the unconditional access and support that had been his birthright. He had traded the security of institutional belonging for the authenticity of personal choice. But the exchange now felt more complex and painful than he had ever imagined. The guards remained at their posts, unwavering sentinels whose loyalty belonged to the crown rather than to the individuals who wore it. Their steadfast dedication to duty, which had once protected him, now served as an impenetrable barrier between him and the father he desperately wanted to see. The symmetry was both admirable and heartbreaking. The same principles that had shaped his upbringing now prevented his return home. As the standoff continued, Harry realized that this moment would define not just his relationship with his father, but his understanding of his own identity. Was he still a prince if the palace gates were closed to him? Was he still a son if formal appointments were required to see his father? The questions swirled in his mind as he prepared for whatever would come next. knowing that his response would echo far beyond the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. The silence stretched between Harry and the guards like a chasm that seemed to grow wider with each passing second. Harry's mind raced through his options, each one seeming less viable than the last. He could demand to speak with someone in authority, but that would likely create a scene that would attract unwanted attention from both palace staff and any media that might be monitoring the area. He could call his father's private office directly, but the public nature of his current position made that approach seem undignified and desperate. Instead, Harry chose a different path. "I understand you have your orders," he said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "But I'm sure you also understand that this is about more than protocol. My father is unwell, and I've traveled a long way to be here for him. Isn't there someone who can clarify the situation? Perhaps the equerry on duty could provide guidance." The senior guard's expression remained unchanged, but Harry caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps discomfort with the situation he was being asked to maintain. These men were career soldiers who had dedicated their lives to serving the crown. They understood duty and sacrifice, loyalty and family. The conflict between their orders and the human drama unfolding before them must have created an internal tension, even if they were trained never to show it. "I'm not authorized to make exceptions to my orders, Your Royal Highness," the guard replied, his tone perhaps slightly softer than before. "The master of the household would need to approve any changes to the visitor schedule. Without proper authorization, my hands are tied." It was the most human response Harry had received since his arrival, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation while maintaining professional boundaries. Harry nodded, recognizing both the guard's position and the hint of personal regret in his words. These men were caught in an impossible situation, asked to deny entry to someone they had known and protected for years, while maintaining the absolute obedience that their roles demanded. Their loyalty was to the institution first, and personal relationships, no matter how long-standing, could not supersede their duty to follow orders. As Harry considered his next move, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, walking across the courtyard with purposeful strides. Sir Edward Sterling, one of his father's longest-serving private secretaries, approached with the measured gait of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Harry felt a surge of hope. Here was someone who had known him since childhood, who understood the complexities of royal family dynamics, who might have the authority to resolve this standoff. Sir Edward's arrival seemed to change the atmosphere immediately. The guards straightened even further, if such a thing were possible, recognizing the approach of senior palace staff. Harry waited expectantly, hoping that this familiar face would bring clarity and perhaps a path forward. However, as Sir Edward drew closer, his expression remained carefully neutral, offering no indication of whether his presence would help or hinder Harry's cause. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Edward said with a formal bow that Harry found unexpectedly painful. The greeting was correct and respectful, but it lacked the warmth that had characterized their interactions during Harry's youth. "I understand you've come to visit His Majesty. I'm afraid there's been some confusion regarding the scheduling." Harry felt his heart sink slightly but maintained his composure. "Sir Edward, I appreciate you coming out to speak with me. My office was told that arrangements had been made for today's visit. Given my father's condition, I had hoped to see him as soon as possible." He tried to strike a balance between assertiveness and respect, recognizing that his relationship with palace staff would be crucial to any chance of success. Sir Edward clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture Harry remembered from countless briefings during his active royal years. "I'm aware of the communication that took place, Your Royal Highness. However, His Majesty's medical team has advised that he maintain a very limited schedule while undergoing treatment. Only essential appointments are being honored at this time." The explanation was delivered with diplomatic precision, offering a reasonable justification while revealing nothing about the true reasons behind the decision. The word essential hung in the air like a sword. Harry wondered what criteria were being used to determine essentiality. Were meetings with government ministers essential while visits from sons were not? Were audiences with foreign dignitaries more critical than family reconciliation? The clinical language of palace administration seemed to reduce personal relationships to mere line items in a schedule, to be prioritized or eliminated based on institutional needs rather than human emotions. "With respect, Sir Edward," Harry said, his voice carrying a new edge of determination. "I would argue that a son's visit to his ailing father should be considered essential, regardless of any other circumstances. This isn't about royal business or public duties. It's about family." He hoped that appealing to the personal nature of his request might penetrate the layers of protocol that seemed to be shielding his father from any real human connection. Sir Edward's expression softened almost imperceptibly, revealing perhaps the first genuine human reaction Harry had encountered since his arrival. For a moment, the mask of professional diplomacy slipped, and Harry glimpsed the man who had once helped coordinate family Christmas celebrations and birthday parties, who had witnessed both the joys and struggles of royal family life from behind the scenes. "I understand your concerns, Your Royal Highness," Sir Edward replied carefully, "and I can assure you that His Majesty is aware of your desire to visit. However, the current circumstances require us to follow medical advice very strictly. Perhaps it would be better if you contacted the office to arrange a visit when His Majesty's health permits more flexibility in his schedule." Harry realized that he was receiving the same message he had heard from the guards, just delivered with more diplomatic language and personal familiarity. The result was the same. He was being asked to leave and go through official channels for what should have been the most natural thing in the world, a son visiting his father. The bureaucracy of royal life had created a buffer so effective that it could prevent even the most basic human connections from taking place. The irony was overwhelming. Harry had left royal life partly because he felt suffocated by the constant presence of staff, advisors, and protocol officers who seemed to mediate every aspect of personal relationships. Now, in his moment of greatest need, those same systems were being used to keep him at arm's length. The institution that had once been designed to protect and support the royal family was now protecting his father from him. As Harry stood there facing the polite but immovable wall of palace administration, he began to understand that this encounter was about much more than scheduling conflicts or medical advice. This was a message, carefully crafted and deliberately delivered, about his changed status within the family structure. His decision to step back from royal duties had consequences that extended far beyond public appearances and official responsibilities. The morning sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the courtyard and illuminating the scene with stark clarity. Harry found himself at a crossroads, forced to decide whether to accept this rejection and retreat or to push forward and risk creating a public spectacle that could damage both his own reputation and his family's privacy. Either choice carried significant costs, and the weight of that decision pressed down on him as he prepared to respond to Sir Edward's diplomatic dismissal. Harry stood in the courtyard, weighing his options as the morning air grew thick with tension. The polite but firm rejection from Sir Edward had crystallized the reality of his situation. He was no longer an insider with automatic access to his family, but rather an outsider who needed to navigate the same bureaucratic channels as any other visitor seeking an audience with the king. The transformation from prince to petitioner felt both surreal and devastating. "Sir Edward," Harry said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, "I flew here immediately when I heard about my father's diagnosis. This isn't about scheduling or protocol. It's about a son who wants to be there for his father during a difficult time. Surely there must be some way to accommodate that basic human need." He hoped that stripping away the formal language and appealing directly to shared humanity might break through the institutional barriers. Sir Edward shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, Harry saw a glimpse of the man who had once helped coordinate surprise birthday parties and family gatherings. "Your Royal Highness, I want you to know that your concern for His Majesty is deeply appreciated. However, the situation is more complex than it might appear. The medical team has been very specific about limiting stress and maintaining a controlled environment during this phase of treatment." Harry felt his frustration building, but he forced himself to remain composed. And seeing his son would cause stress? Having family support during a health crisis would be harmful. The questions hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. How had family relationships become so complicated that medical professionals were advising against them? The private secretary's pause revealed the difficulty of his position. He was clearly uncomfortable with the role he was being asked to play, caught between his loyalty to his employer and his recognition of the fundamental unfairness of the situation. "It's not that simple, Your Royal Highness. Other considerations that factor into these decisions." Those other considerations spoke volumes. Harry realized that his father's health, while certainly a factor, was not the only issue at play. The ongoing tensions within the family, the public nature of their disputes, and the potential for media scrutiny were all influencing what should have been a purely personal decision. His father was being protected not just from illness, but from the complications that Harry's presence might bring. As they spoke, Harry became aware of movement behind the palace windows. Curtains twitched slightly, and shadows passed behind the glass, suggesting that their conversation was being observed from within. The knowledge that unseen eyes were watching this painful exchange added another layer of humiliation to an already difficult situation. His personal pain was becoming a spectacle for palace staff, who would undoubtedly discuss and analyze every detail of this encounter. "I understand that there are protocols to follow," Harry said, his voice growing steadier as he found his resolve. "But I also know that my father raised me to believe that family comes first, especially during times of crisis. If he's truly too unwell to see me, I'll respect that, but I need to hear it from him directly, not filtered through staff and advisors." Sir Edward's expression revealed his internal struggle. As a longtime servant of the crown, he understood the importance of maintaining institutional dignity and following proper procedures. But as someone who had watched Harry grow up, who had witnessed the close relationship between father and son, he also understood the human cost of the barriers being erected. "I wish I could facilitate that conversation, Your Royal Highness," he said carefully. "But His Majesty's communications are being managed very carefully right now. Perhaps if you were to write a letter expressing your concerns and wishes, I could ensure it reaches him directly?" The suggestion of a letter felt like another layer of bureaucracy being inserted between Harry and his father. Written communication, formal and distant, replacing the immediate human connection he desperately sought. It was a practical solution that completely missed the emotional urgency of his situation. Harry's phone buzzed again, and this time he glanced at it briefly. A message from Meghan. How did it go? The kids are asking when Grandpa Charlie will be better. The innocent question from his children added another dimension to his frustration. How could he explain to them that their grandfather, whom they barely knew due to distance and protocol, was now completely inaccessible due to institutional barriers? "Sir Edward," Harry said, his voice carrying a new note of determination, "I'm not leaving the area until I can speak with my father directly, even if it's just by phone. I'll wait in the town, I'll stay at a hotel, I'll do whatever it takes. But I won't return to California knowing I didn't do everything possible to be here for him during this difficult time." The declaration seemed to catch the private secretary off guard. Royal protocol typically relied on everyone following established procedures and accepting decisions gracefully. Harry's refusal to simply go away and wait for official channels to work their slow magic represented a challenge to the system's authority. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Edward said, his tone becoming more urgent, "I must advise against that course of action. The media attention that would inevitably follow could create complications for everyone involved. Surely it would be better to handle this through proper channels, quietly and efficiently." Harry realized that the palace's primary concern was not his father's health or their family relationship, but rather the potential for public embarrassment and media coverage. The institution's first instinct was always to protect itself from scrutiny, even when that meant sacrificing personal relationships and human connections. "The media attention exists because my family relationships have been made into public property," Harry replied, his frustration finally breaking through his careful composure. "I didn't create this situation. I'm just trying to be a son to my father when he needs me most." The conversation had reached an impasse. Sir Edward clearly wanted to help, but felt constrained by forces beyond his control. Harry was unwilling to accept rejection without fighting for access to his father. The guards remained at their posts, silent witnesses to a family drama playing out within the ancient walls that had seen centuries of similar conflicts. As the morning progressed, Harry began to understand that this confrontation was about more than just one visit. It was about whether he would ever truly be able to return to his family, whether the wounds inflicted by his departure could heal, and whether institutional loyalty would always trump family bonds within the royal system. The next few hours would determine not just whether he would see his father that day, but whether there was any path forward for rebuilding the relationships that his choices had damaged. The stakes could not have been higher, and the outcome would reshape his understanding of what it meant to be both a prince and a son. The standoff continued as the morning stretched into afternoon, with Harry refusing to leave and Sir Edward increasingly uncomfortable with the situation he was being asked to maintain. The private secretary excused himself multiple times to make phone calls, presumably consulting with higher authorities about how to handle the unprecedented situation of a royal son being denied access to his ailing father. During one of Sir Edward's absences, Harry found himself alone again with the guards, who had maintained their professional composure throughout the entire ordeal. The senior guard, perhaps moved by the obvious pain in Harry's situation, broke protocol slightly by offering a small gesture of acknowledgement, a barely perceptible nod that seemed to convey understanding, if not agreement, with Harry's position. "I served in Afghanistan too, Your Royal Highness," the guard said quietly, so softly that only Harry could hear. "I understand what it means to fight for the people you care about." It was a moment of human connection that pierced through the institutional barriers, reminding Harry that even within the rigid structure of royal protocol, there were individuals who recognized the fundamental humanity of his situation. The comment also reminded Harry of his own military service, of the bonds forged in combat, and of the values that had shaped his understanding of duty and loyalty. He realized that his fight to see his father was not unlike the battles he had fought in the desert. It required persistence, courage, and the willingness to face seemingly insurmountable odds for the sake of something greater than himself. As the afternoon wore on, small groups of palace staff began to gather at windows and doorways, creating an audience for the drama unfolding in the courtyard. Their presence added pressure to an already tense situation, as everyone involved became aware that their actions were being scrutinized and would likely be discussed throughout the palace community for months to come. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sir Edward returned with news that would change everything. His expression was different, less guarded, more hopeful, suggesting that his latest round of consultations had produced a breakthrough. "Your Royal Highness," he said, approaching with careful steps, "I've been in contact with His Majesty's physician, and there may be a possibility for a brief meeting this evening. However, there would be strict conditions that would need to be observed." Harry felt his heart leap with hope, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I'll agree to any conditions necessary," he said immediately. "Whatever is required to ensure my father's comfort and safety, I'll gladly comply with." Sir Edward nodded approvingly. The meeting would be limited to 30 minutes, would take place in His Majesty's private study rather than his bedroom, and would need to be conducted without any recording devices or mobile phones present. Additionally, the contents of your conversation would need to remain strictly private, no public statements or interviews about what is discussed. The conditions were reasonable, even expected given the circumstances. Harry quickly agreed, relief flooding through him as he realized that persistence and determination had finally broken through the institutional barriers. The system had bent, if not broken, allowing human need to triumph over bureaucratic procedure. "There's one more thing, Your Royal Highness," Sir Edward added carefully. "His Majesty specifically asked that you come alone, and that this meeting be treated as a private family matter, separate from any ongoing public or media considerations." The message was clear. This reunion would be about father and son, not about princes and kings, not about public relations or family image management. It would be stripped of all the complications that had made their relationship so difficult in recent years, reduced to its most fundamental elements. As arrangements were made for Harry's entry to the palace, he reflected on the day's events and what they had taught him about the institution he had been born into. The rigid protocols and bureaucratic barriers that had initially seemed designed to keep him away had actually served a different purpose. They had tested his commitment, his willingness to fight for his family relationships despite the personal cost. The guards who had stood firm throughout the day finally stepped aside, their duty now redirected toward facilitating rather than preventing Harry's entry. Their professionalism had never wavered, but now it served to protect rather than exclude. The senior guard, who had shared his own military experience, offered another small nod as Harry passed, a gesture of respect between veterans who understood the meaning of persistence under fire. Walking through the palace corridors for the first time in years, Harry was struck by how little had changed in the physical environment, yet how dramatically his relationship to these spaces had evolved. The portraits of ancestors looked down with the same stern expressions. The ancient carpets muffled his footsteps just as they had during his childhood, but he now moved through these halls as a visitor rather than a resident. The reunion with his father, when it finally came, was everything Harry had hoped for and more. Stripped of the complications of public roles and media scrutiny, it was simply a conversation between a man facing his mortality and a son who wanted to be there for him. They spoke of family, of regrets, of hopes for the future, and of the love that had persisted despite all the complications that had driven them apart. The 30-minute meeting stretched to nearly an hour, as both men seemed reluctant to return to the formal roles that typically defined their relationship. When they finally parted, both understood that something fundamental had shifted, not just in their personal relationship, but in Harry's understanding of his place within the royal family. As Harry prepared to leave the palace, Sir Edward approached him one final time. "Your Royal Highness," he said with genuine warmth, "I hope you know that your persistence today was not unnoticed or unappreciated. Sometimes the institution needs to be reminded that it serves the family, not the other way around." The comment perfectly captured the lesson of the day. The royal system, with all its protocols and procedures, was designed to protect and serve the monarchy as an institution. But occasionally, it needed individuals with the courage to push back, to insist that human relationships and family bonds were more important than bureaucratic convenience. Walking back through the palace gates as evening fell, Harry felt a profound sense of resolution. The confrontation with the guards had initially seemed like a rejection and humiliation, but it had ultimately become a test of his commitment to his family relationships. By refusing to accept easy dismissal, by insisting on his right to be present during his father's crisis, he had proven, to himself and to others, that his love for his family transcended any institutional barriers. The day had also provided clarity about his future relationship with the royal family. He would never again be the insider he had once been, never again have automatic access or unquestioned privilege. But he had learned that with persistence, courage, and genuine love, he could still find ways to be present for the moments that truly mattered. As he walked away from Windsor Castle, Harry understood that the guard who had stopped him cold that morning had unwittingly provided him with an opportunity. Not just to see his father, but to prove to himself and his family that some bonds are stronger than any protocol, and some fights are worth having regardless of the obstacles they present.